critic for Salon.com, and today I'm your host for Half Hour with the Great. I'm so pleased to be in conversation with Tony McNamara, the creator, showrunner, and executive producer of this Emmy-nominated Hulu series starring Elle Fanning as Catherine the Great and Nicholas Hoult as Peter III, the deposed Emperor of Russia. Ha ha ha. Tony.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
Pleasure. Doing well, thanks.
Yeah. Now, Hulu aired this series' second season recently to much critical acclaim. It's already in production on the third. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about The Great.
Well, The Great's it's a period drama, comedy drama, I guess. It's like about Catherine the Great's life. It's not completely historically accurate, but there's a lot of historically accurate things. But it's essentially a comedy drama about this young woman who comes to Russia from another country and somehow takes it over and overthrows her husband and ends up going to run Russia for a long time. That's where we kick off the series, is her arriving in Russia to marry this crazy Nicholas Hoult emperor. And we're up to season 3.
I love that you say she ends up running Russia for a long time, because she's the longest ruling female leader in
like
Russia.
34 years or something.
Give the lady some props.
Yeah.
But that gives you a lot of leeway as a storyteller, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's not like we're going to do 34 seasons, but it does give us a lot of, and I think because I love certain things she did in her time and really want to kind of explore them. And so I can grab things that happen in year 24 and put them in year 2, because they're sort of fascinating. And so every season I do that. I find some things she did that were great and, or difficult or, complicated, I guess. She's also quite a complicated ruler. She's not just a simple, hero. She's got a lot of flawed qualities. So, yeah.
Indeed. Well, speaking of that, let's take a look at the trailer so people can get an idea of what is in store for The Great.
I bless our new leader, Catherine the Great.
You're calling yourself the Great?
Of course.
Seems arrogant.
It is if you're not great. If you are, it is just calling things what they are.
Right.
Shh.
Darling girl, there is a rumor sweeping Europe that you have taken Russia from your husband.
You're my wife. You honestly can't think you can run Russia without bloodshed.
I can. I'm winning.
I love that you think that. He is a threat. I really, really want to kill him.
Reason and compassion can win any argument better than violence.
Let's just behead him like civilized men.
We must act. Let us remake Russia, my friend.
Everyone expects you to only last a year.
I'm safe until the baby is born.
It must be strange, a human creature inside you. Do you ever think, what if he has a knife?
I never do.
This is a dynasty. If she loves you, you will make more babies and protect the family line. You must make her love you.
Should we have sex?
I'd rather choke to death on this tiny chicken.
I have been trying to change myself when you are flawless. Exactly. It's time I regain the throne.
And then you kill her.
Imprisoned until Paul is born.
You're a good dad.
You're not long for the throne. I'm chosen by God. You were chosen by mail order. Ponder that.
I have a busy day running Russia, the country I just took from you.
Go get him!
Are you kidding? That could have been me!
She loves me, that is certain.
You're sure?
I look at you and go dry like sand.
There are so many fantastic lines in this show, and I have to ask you specifically about that one before coming back to another one leading into a larger conversation. I look at you and go dry like sand. Is there a story behind that line? How did you come up with it?
Not really. I think I just threw it in on the day. I think they had a long scene together of generally insulting each other, and I think I was just trying something that would top his lust for her, basically.
Well, that pretty much does it, and he doesn't give up.
No, it's true. He never gives up.
So here's the other line that particular trailer was built around, which is reason and compassion can win any argument better than violence. That comes back to bite Catherine in a real way. several times through the season, but certainly at the end. And we'll go back and talk a little bit about the first one as well. But can you talk about how that line might have been? Was that one of the kind of central lines you thought about building the season around?
Yeah, because I think thematically, you know, the first she takes power and then it's like, thinks that's the hard bit. And then the hard bit is actually exercising power. And she has very rightfully idealistic views such as that. And she's in a country where that's sort of not the currency that they use to operate under. So she's continually like up against her own idealism versus the reality of what sort of place she's dealing with. And and it sort of brings her undone, I guess, occasionally. And but it's just like something she has to face. And whether her compassion and reason are going to win the day or not is part of her big battle.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit so we could go all the way back to season 1 for people who haven't seen it. There is so much of a surprise of when Catherine comes in and doesn't quite understand why so many things about Russia, the fact that they don't necessarily prize literacy in women, that the Enlightenment movement has completely not really passed them, but they're just not that interested.
Yeah.
And now this started out as a play. I'm wondering, even when you were looking at this as a play, if that was part of what inspired you, this idea of there is an enlightenment going, you know, and the idea of the enlightened Western world versus this pushback against it.
Yeah, no, it really did. Because she not only came to this other country, she came with these ideas that were very important to her. And that were sort of sweeping Europe in various ways. And I suppose she had a real desire to kind of find out if you could practically exercise the ideas of the Enlightenment in a real way, in a physical way, as well as they're just being beautiful ideas. So that's sort of what the thrust of her philosophy is sort of built on, and the conflict between, you know, that idea and the reality of what you're dealing with, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the opening credits of every episode, The Great is humorously described as an occasionally true story, and sometimes almost entirely untrue. Is there a certain balance that you seek to achieve between the content that's factually accurate in each episode and the parts that are entirely fictional?
Yeah, and probably not in each episode, but over the season, there'll be the main strand of what the events, certain events, usually the major ones, were kind of relatively true, you know. So, you know, she did kind of bring in variolation, and she did try and take, you know, vaccination. She spread it through Russia for smallpox. So there's always a bunch of things that were true. And then about her reign in particular, but then there's also a host of other things that are just true of the day, like what contraception was, certain, so there's always like quite a lot that's true, but it's just not historically, chronologically true in a way that a historian wouldn't tear their hair out when they tried to think this might be a true history.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things they would probably take issue with to start out with, and I don't know if this is a spoiler alert because you can look this up on Wikipedia, frankly, folks, but shouldn't Peter not be around at this point if we were going to look? And I have no problem with that because Nicholas Hoult is fantastic. But, you know, let's talk a little bit about that. Is, you know, that's kind of a major quote unquote character in this history. You know, the real person who has a huge role in the Great. So finding that balance between, you know, the tension of kind of knowing what happens, and you're not, you know, the Great isn't the first season or the first series that does this, but kind of knowing what happens to the guy and kind of watching to see how things turn out.
I think because I think out of all the characters that, like, Catherine's the only real character. Even Peter is so unlike the actual Peter, because I just didn't kind of feel like the real Peter was a proper antagonist for her in terms of the story I was trying to tell about. You know, and he's got a few characteristics, I suppose, of the original Peter. But yeah, I think it was just like, it tells her story. It's sort of like, what's the truth of her story as distinct from what are the historical facts of it. So, and I just, you know, Nick Holt's so great. They're so great together. I mean, it's not a history lesson. It's a TV show, you know.
Indeed, yeah. And let's go back a little bit. You were saying some things that were true about Catherine's character in the history. Are there aspects of her story, you were saying before that you kind of like to look at the history and pull certain things out to put it into a season, that it doesn't necessarily have to be chronologically accurate?
Yeah.
Are there aspects about what she brought to the actual Catherine the Great brought to the history of Russia and to culture that you might pull out that speak to modern culture, as in what we're living through now?
Yeah, I think the main one in a strange way is the idea of the difficulty of progress and change is a big sort of, because we do a lot of contemporary research as well around that idea of, because in a strange way, particularly in the first season, we felt like she was like an activist coming in to like change things. And even in the second series, the idea of the inequality of Russia and her trying to deal with that, even though with tragic results and funny results as well. I think those kind of things, but she did bring in an enormous amount of things, particularly culturally and education and that kind of thing that I guess through the series, different seasons we'll probably get to, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. It is odd to see when she talks about her first mandates of all these things that she wants to enact, and they sound beautiful. And at the same time, we're looking at the way that power works, particularly now. There are moments where I'm just like, oh, this poor woman. They sound great. It sounds like a utopia. And then of course we know that even then it's going to be difficult.
I think so. I think that's what I mean, she's such a great character because there's a heroicness to just keeping going and keeping trying to change and yes, there's a sort of foolishness to it, but we always think of her, like Al and I do, as a delusional optimist. So that's the baseline of her character in a way, a mix of that optimism and arrogance, where she just can't believe people won't eventually come around to her ideas because she's right about everything. So there's sort of that for a character, in a character sense, that we're always like coming back to.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit about Peter. I love the hedonism and decadence that is so central to this character. Yeah. It's in the look of the series, it's within the dialogue, everything that's going on with the subplots and his approach to leadership and life itself. Like there's just so much that someone can accomplish with him by just giving him the right pork roast. I'm not going to say exactly, that has a context, but yeah, so I must imagine that it takes some effort to bring that up to life, both from the perspective of set design and costuming, but I'm wondering how much you kind of write that into each script, that idea of decadence kind of leading the day or leading the motivation.
Yeah, no, always. I think because he's such a hedonist. He's such a guy who's just like, whatever will make me happy in the next moment. And he's a sensualist, so he loves food and women and drinking and partying. And so, yeah, and we do a lot with set design, with food, and food's become a real element of his personality in a big way. It's sort of grown as it's gone on. Where now Nick's like, I think I should become a foodie just so I understand what I'm saying half the time. But yeah, I think it's just an inherent part of his character that's so different from her character, because she's all about purpose and helping other people. He's got this lazy, attractive hedonism that you're kind of like, wow, it seems kind of good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they also have these different approaches to suffering. You get the sense that Catherine's never suffered and Peter's never suffered, but when he comes upon suffering for the first time, just in terms of having to just give up luxuries, he just folds.
He does.
So yeah, so with that, I mean, what is it that you're kind of hoping to, was it that you're kind of saying with this character, just in terms of maybe anything?
Being a male who's received all advantages and doesn't even realize, and so a lot of it's that there's a cluelessness and a lack of maliciousness to him, but the cluelessness is born of the fact he's never had to struggle for anything. He doesn't really understand people because of that. And this sort of hedonism is kind of like, he has no real purpose other than enjoyment of each moment, which is kind of good, but it's also like a little bit empty. So I think with him, I was always about, he's a kid with a really powerful father who he's never going to be as good as, and he sort of knows it, and he's sort of not even interested in his inheritance in some ways. You know, he's not really cut out to be an emperor. But he's continually called back to it because of that's what he was born to do. And God said God says he's the emperor and his father. And so even though he'd rather just have a big dinner, he occasionally has to try and be an emperor, I suppose.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the way you use his relationship with Catherine throughout, certainly in season 1, but in season 2, it takes on a bit of a turn just to illustrate the frustration that many women feel when they aren't listened to or taken seriously. And with that, I want to throw to our second clip, which I just adore. So let's take a look at that as an example.
She will let you out for it. Of course. I've not missed a first day of truffle season ever, and will not start now. She's not a cruel maniac. Ah, I wanted to talk to you. Firstly, meet Coco Atina.
This is my court and my rules. You fucking killed Tarzinski, didn't you?
I did. And felt bad about it.
This random violence is not the way of my court.
He called me dickhead.
That is your answer. I killed a man because he called me dickhead. Do you hear how that sounds?
Sounds perfectly logical.
Violence is not the answer to everything.
In this court, it is a language that everyone understands. You will not get far if you do not come to terms with that.
Fine. Guards! Beat the fuck out of him.
Funny. You're a witty creature. At times, the point is so slight, one almost does not... What the fuck are you two doing? Hey!
Help, and you will be shot. My husband and I are busy discussing an issue. Can you hear me now? Fucking hell.
Yeah, that was cathartic.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that scene, and then and I'll have a little follow-up. Just at what point did you decide that Catherine really needs to teach this man a lesson about listening to her? Because he goes for so long.
Yeah, it really does. I think it was early in the second season. I think it's episode 3, and I really wanted an episode where the fact she'd kept him alive was a problem immediately, because it is a mistake in a way that she shouldn't have. And I really wanted her to be sort of angry at herself at what the coup had cost her, angry at him, and just sort of blaze through the episode in a way, in a sort of, I don't really understand. I've now caught up with my feelings after the coup, and I'm very angry at him, at what happened. And he's still, even though he's lost the empire, he's still a bit, just wants to go truffling and enjoy his life.
I love the fact that right now we are at this time where escapist television is so important. We still get with the great that escapism. And yet there are a few things that kind of relate to, especially as an American watching this, some larger things like, a coup. We also have everything that's going on in the world. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, what do you think that Catherine's journey that we're seeing, particularly in season 2, tells us about whether change is possible with or without violence? Because she's very adamant about, like, we're bringing reform without violence.
I mean,
it says.
I think it's that. I think it's the struggles of how to bring reform and how to change something when a culture is brought, is entrenched, got some really entrenched views of things, how she can bring about change, or how anyone brings, in our current world, how we bring about change, even though it's sort of everyone wants it, but somehow we can't seem to do it. And so it sort of speaks to that, I guess, in the contemporary sense of the struggle of, especially I think younger people really want the world to change and are really struggling with the fact it won't, and the fact the generations above them seem useless at affecting effective change. And so I think I kind of like that she's young for that reason, that I think they really are rightfully struggling at the lack of progress in the rest of in our society, and the lack of ability to change in the face of things where it's like, shouldn't we change? So.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I loved Gillian Anderson's role this season. And let's talk a little bit about that. There are so many aspects of it that I think add to this series, not just in terms of moving the plot forward, but the fact that we see Joanna as this very like powerful but sexy, sensual woman coming in and both helping her daughter and ruining her daughter's life.
Yeah,
is pretty powerful. So how did she come to be?
Well, Catherine's mother in history was sort of well known as sort of this crazy, like slightly figure who sort of spied against her when she was at court and worked against her for a while. But I think we were kind of interested in her, and then we just wanted to nuance the character. So she was really about who could have a daughter who became this person. And so it was a sort of delusional love, and a kind of like she'd wanted this thing for her daughter that was a big thing, but her daughter even had ideas bigger than that, which she didn't want her to have. So it was a very simple mother-daughter relationship, just against the scale of a whole empire. And also, yeah, we wanted her to still be, she's still a woman who was sexual and a woman who kind of wanted what she wanted. So we just wanted to find someone who was really could do the comedy, and it's, and Gillian's so great dramatically, and just walk this great line where you went, I believe she loves her daughter, but she's sort of destroying her, and that she could carry the idea that if she slept with her husband, it wasn't like a thing, it was just something she wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. It was fabulous. I think about that, and I think the other storyline that I love that has huge consequences in the end is the marriage between Mariel and her 8-year-old cousin, Maxim. And of course, that makes sense within the series, but if you were to just explain it to someone who hadn't seen it, it's like, wait, what's happening now?
It's true.
But yeah, can you talk a little bit about that aspect? Because those strange marriages that were completely political and to circumvent law were
they kind of happened all the time, and particularly amongst kings and queens, and it was really also a way to tell this. I think felt like it was a trope in period things where women are financially at the mercy of husbands, and dead husbands are a problem, and dead fathers. And so I just wanted to do it in a different way. And I thought Mariel was such a scammy character that she would try and scam the system so that a man wouldn't have power over her. Instead, she'd be married to an 8-year-old boy she could boss around. So yeah, I think at the time I said it, I think the writers' room were like, you can't do that. But I was like, I think it'll be great. It's going to be fine. So we did it.
I think everybody understood exactly what was going on there.
Well, exactly. I was like, if we tell it well, it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of telling things well, leading up to the ending, there's this wonderful speech that Peter and Catherine give at their wedding banquet that isn't about wisdom of marriage, but more about the truth of their own marriage. Can you talk a little bit about just that, and maybe give us, without teasing too much, give us just a little bit of how that kind of will maybe inspire what happens in the 3rd season?
Yeah, well, I think it's like the climax of the 2nd season is they do love each other. They have recognized it, and they have to have another moment where she has to recognize, and him to some degree, he has to recognize his flaws honestly, and she has to recognize who she's in love with, because she's sort of she knows who she's married to in some ways, but in another way she doesn't. And it's just whether she can live with who she's married to, or can bear him dying, So it is like a little journey for her about human frailty, and because she has a very idealistic idea about people, what they're capable of, what they should be capable of. And so there's something in the climax about her frailty, her flaws, recognizing that, and therefore being able to recognize he has flaws, big flaws, and whether they can go forward as a couple, and what that would look like, how you could actually be together, like as a married couple, those two. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
You've mentioned before that you were inspired by The Graduate in that last scene.
True.
Can you talk a little bit about how that famous model kind of inspired the last view that we have of
I think because that was it. I was like, I wanted them to get to the end of it, realize they couldn't live without each other, and just sort of look at each other and be like, I don't know how to go forward with you, but I have no choice. So we're not sure what's going to happen because, good Lord, we've done some things to each other. We've got some baggage to go forward with. And while I was thinking about that, I was thinking about, I'd been telling one of the younger writers in the room that they should watch The Graduate, and they were sort of being like persistently refusing to because I wanted them to, which is like our relationship. I'm like, you should watch that. And she's like, oh, yeah, I'll never do that because you would think I should. So I was explaining it, and then Fiona, who wrote the episode 10 with me, and we were like, it's like The Graduate. And then we were like, you know what, we should just do it like The Graduate because we love that film so much. I love Mike Nichols so much. He's such a lesson in drama and comedy fused, and was one of, Hal Ashby and him and people like that were real inspiring to me about how you could fuse kind of absurdist comedy and drama in a way, like The Graduate does in a lot of ways. So yeah, we just thought we'd embrace it and just do it,
So going all the way back, you originally wrote The Great as a play.
Yes.
And it premiered in the Sydney Theatre Company in 2008. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So when you brought it to Hulu and you pitched it for at least 6 seasons, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did do a different version of it for 6. Yeah.
Do you feel like 6 seasons is enough at this point, or as you're going on, are you discovering like, oh my goodness, this could feel much more than that?
I think originally I'd pitched it a bit like The Crown, like 2 seasons, but I think once we got the ensemble together and Nick and Al was so great and we all formed this little unit and we all got along so well, and it felt like their relationship and the other characters in the ensemble were so rich. It did feel like I couldn't tell their piece in 2. So, and it's just, I think it's just the more, if you have good characters, the more you look into them, the more story you end up with. And she had such a, the early part of her reign was so fascinating that it felt like we could go for a while, just us,
There's so many shows out there to watch. What's the one thing that comes to mind about The Great that might entice someone to start watching?
I think what's good about our show is they're great characters, and it's a very funny, dramatic show that's sort of romantic and yet full of bloodshed. So I feel like it's a really sort of good show. And I think I always like the fact so many husbands and wives come up to me and go, we watch it together. And it's like the only show we watch together, because I feel like it really has an ability to like sort of be a show that a lot of people can like,
Mm-hmm. What was your favorite show or your favorite aspect of this last season?
I think my favorite aspect last season was probably just, I really love Nick and Al's scenes together. When we do, when I write them a 7-page 2-hander and they come in and just nail it, and it's fun for the 3 of us. So I think they're always, great times for us, because it's just, they're all up for it. They love getting, they don't love getting 7 pages. But when they come in, they love it,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think they're my favorite moments.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine that they also have some moments where are they allowed to kind of freestyle riff a little bit when they
No.
They just go into the delivery?
No, we're as Al says, we're like, our show is fun discipline, No, because we work, the scripts have really like worked, and the tone's so precise that we don't really ad lib ever. We might change a few things with the act, when the actors say it and it doesn't quite feel right. But we're not really a freestyling show. We're more like, here's the script and we learn it and we sort of investigate it and then we go from there. But yeah.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for doing this today. Everything about The Great is just superior. The dialogue, the timing. It's an incredible show. And thank you to our friends at Hulu for joining us as well. And for everyone else, please watch The Great. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And yes, I appreciate it. All right. This has been another episode of Half Hour With.